bad turning the air conditioning off so it's quiet in here when it's like 1,000,000 degrees outside.
It's not chilly out there.
It is not chilly out there. Cool. All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of CUB Tracks. This is Corey Singletary here. I got that out of order. Now my brain is all screwed up. Corey Singletary here with another episode of CUB Tracks. Alongside me, as always,
Tom Content, Citizens Utility Board. Welcome back.
Cool. So we're recording this on one of those days that the utilities love because the temperature outside is 1,000,000 and, you know, everyone's running their air conditioning and everything like that.
It's after the really warm winter, they've been rubbing their hands together. Like, are we going to get some real weather that makes people use their heating HVAC systems this time around?
Some sales. Yep. Cool. All right. So I think we've teased it a couple of times. We're going to start getting into it because it is the big issue that a lot of people in the state are looking at least in sort of the eastern half of the state, pretty much the entire eastern half of the state, between We Energies, Wisconsin Gas, and Wisconsin Public Service Corporation. All of those utilities are in for general rate cases to adjust rates for 2026, 2025, and 2026. Let's not forget 25. For both years, 2025 and 2026. So this is, for folks who aren't familiar, if this is your first rodeo with respect to utility regulation, the utilities come in Wisconsin at least. This is a special Wisconsin thing. They come in every 2 years with the big utilities with their ask for rate adjustment. Most of the time it's an increase. Every once in a while we see a decrease, but they come in every 2 years for their rate adjustment. And this year is the turn for the WEC Energy Group utilities, We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service. And there are some, we're just going to hit the high points today, and then we'll drill down into some things. But there were some eye-watering things just off the jump in terms of the numbers that you and I were like, yeah, we got to start talking about this.
These are big numbers. I mean, $800 million is just to start it off, is a big number. $800 million over 2 years, if you take both utilities together. Over $800 million. So from Kenosha to Washington Island or from Kenosha to Rhinelander, depending on where you are, that it affects everybody. And it's double-digit increases for over 2 years for customers who just had double-digit increases over the last 2 years.
Yeah, so I actually had this put together for the Nasuka mid-year meeting. So for We Energies customers, and these are high-level numbers, so your mileage may vary depending on exactly how much usage you are and what type of customer you are. But for the overall ask, to your point of some big numbers, they want to increase the total amount of revenue, total amount of money they collect from customers in 2025 by almost 7%, and then in 2026 another 4.75% on top of that 7%. So all told, you know, that's pretty big. And then residential, it's about 9.25% and then 8.5% in 2025 and 2026, and those numbers stack. And so we were actually looking, if you just even go back, not even that far, to like 2023. So the rates from how they've changed from 2022 until through 26, if the utility gets what they're asking for, their rates will have gone up by over 23% overall for We Energies, and have gone up by over 32% for residential customers for We Energies. Wisconsin Public Service, the number is a little lower. You're looking at about 8.5% overall in 2025 and a little under 5% in 26. Residential customers take it on the chin a little bit harder in the first year for public service, about 14%, and then it's only, I'm putting huge air quotes around that, only a 5% increase in 2026. So big increases over the next 2 years the utilities have asked for. I sound like Yoda there. Big increases that they've asked for, and then also big increases if you look at even just the recent history.
Big increase, yeah. The recent history is just the last case. There was a double-digit increase for residential, but this is stacking one on top of the other, so that what'd you say, 32% over from end of if you're from somebody whose bill was that bill changed from the end of 2022 to January of 2026.
Yeah,
it's really striking, and it shows why affordability is job one around here.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, when you really think about it, right, 2022 to 2026, that's 4 years, right? And for rates to go up by almost a third
Right.
over that period of time
Right.
is huge. And we were already, one of these utilities, We Energies on the electric side in particular, was already one of the most expensive electric utilities on a per kilowatt hour basis in the entire Midwest. For residential customers, and to have this increase is really challenging to kind of, I'm not even going to say get behind, but to even, I don't know, to fathom.
To say that it's I can't believe we're speechless on something like this. It's so big that it just raises the question of how much are they pushing customers to the point of unaffordability and inability to afford the bills. And so that's why we're taking it. That's why it's kind of job one for this year is this case, these two cases really. But
yeah, and actually, we'll get into it in just a second. But you'd mentioned, the impact on customers, and I actually was talking to someone from a private water utility that operates in a lot of states, and admittedly, they're not particularly popular in those other states.
This is true.
But even internally around the country, there are utility folks that are asking the question: is there a tipping point for customers where just beyond a certain point it just becomes unaffordable? And bad things start to happen in terms of some maybe sort of death spiral, or I don't know what the case might be. But like, is there some magic point we're going to cross where it's just the affordability situation is really bad for customers? So, Tom,
yes,
big numbers. What's behind all of this? You want to give a rundown on that?
What's behind in terms of the request?
Behind the request, what's the big drivers?
I mean, the big drivers are clearly the request for new capital, the new capital expenditures linked to the projects already approved. That's a significant one, and in terms of the solar, the battery, and the natural gas projects that have already been approved for both We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service. And on the natural gas side, there's the LNG facilities that have gone into place, and those are drivers, again, additional capital expenditures that are significant drivers for the rates. But it's not the only thing in the case, but that's big.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the biggest jumping off point, I think, actually, in one of the exhibits from the company in 2025 in particular. All of that the new capital investment, all the investment in infrastructure, basically, that the utilities have been making over the last couple of years that they now get to start putting into rates because they get to, if they flip the switch, it's on or it's operational or it's flowing gas or whatever, they get to start recovering those costs now. That's really sort of the biggest driver, particularly overall, but particularly in the first year. And for folks who aren't familiar with what Tom is talking about, so both of these companies, because they sort of operate together at a planning level, have developed what they call their generation reshaping plan. It's essentially their resource plan for how they're going to go through the clean energy transition, or at least the current energy transition they're going through, replacing a lot of coal, mostly replacing coal with other things, solar, battery, electric storage. But there's also been some new gas. There's also some new gas on the horizon.
Yes.
You also mentioned the natural gas side of the business. There's been some pipeline infrastructure investments, as well as two big liquefied natural gas facilities to provide sort of winter capacity when capacity is short to move things along the interstate pipeline. So all of that steel in the ground has got to start to be paid for. The commission already approved it. They already built it. So that's what's coming in. What else? What's another one right off the top of your head in terms of a huge driver?
I see a driver in terms of they want their profits to go back up. So in other words, in the last case that was decided at the end of 2022, the commission brought down the profit levels, the return on equity for all these utilities, from 10 to 10.2% down to 9.8%. And that provided some savings for customers that helped moderate the size of those increases. But from our perspective, the profit levels are still too high, and so directionally, the commission has been moving in a direction with other utilities and these utilities of bringing them down, and yet they're back in asking to reverse that trend and go right back up.
Yeah. So the return on equity is essentially, the amount that the commission builds into the rates, right? The regulation, the utilities, according to the law, are allowed an opportunity to recover their costs and earn, a reasonable return on their investments for, the investors. In this case, these are investor-owned utilities, so for their shareholders. And so there's a percentage you can think of. I know you in the press you refer to it as a profit rate,
Right.
but it's the return on that investment, return on that equity investment. And so the commission in the last case, like you'd mentioned, went from 10 down to 9.8. That's the right direction. We think it could go quite a bit lower without harming the utilities. Certainly the shareholders won't like it, but it wouldn't harm the utilities per se.
Exactly.
But they want to go back up to 10.
Yeah.
Which seems
Reversing field.
Yes, I think how did the chair describe it in the last set of cases when Excel asked for
That somebody didn't read the room?
Yeah. Something like that. So
I try to remember good quotes, just given my background. Yeah,
Yes.
I when there's a good quote, I kind of latch onto it.
So there's the sort of they want to go back to a higher rate. And then in a kind of a sneaky move, in addition to moving the percentage that everyone pays attention to, they're also asking for sort of a backdoor way to squeeze more, return dollars out of customers, right?
You're right. So you earn your 10% or 9.8% as it is today on a certain amount, and they want to increase the amount they want to earn that return on. Mm-hmm. So the share of utility dollars that could be eligible for that profit rate would go up. And so it's just you take those things together, and it's actually it's real money.
Yeah, they want to increase the amount of equity in their capital structure to use the wonky terms. But you can think of it as if you made $100 of investments, and let's say presently you could apply that 10 or 9.8% that return rate to half of it. They want to make it, instead of it being 50%, they want to make it like 51%. Specifically, they want to go from 53 to 53.5.
Yeah, they're already above 50. So,
yeah, but they want to thicken that layer, that amount of their capital structure that they get to earn a return on. So that again produces the effect of more dollars that have to come out of customers' pockets to flow to investors.
Right. And we've seen over time that the shareholders of this company, the parent company, have done very, very well over the last whatever it is 20 years since and during that same period of time our rates have gone from, as a statewide, our rates have gone from second lowest in the Midwest or lowest to the second highest in the Midwest. So I think this case is. And when it gets to the decision time, I think this case is going to be all about balance, balancing between the shareholder interests and the customer interests.
Well, and on this capital structure issue too, this is again sort of a were you paying attention? You're obviously not reading the room, because last year, Xcel Energy came in with essentially the same ask. Admittedly, theirs was a little more brazen in terms of how much they wanted. No, I'm sorry, Alliant Energy.
No, Xcel wanted it straight to increase the return on equity, but Alliant actually asked for this other move that would increase it in the kind of the end around way.
Correct.
Or the back end way.
Sorry, I didn't. For those who are actually from Xcel and are listening, I didn't mean to incorrectly call you out. But the commission, to your point,
we call both of you out in the cases, though, both Alliant and Xcel. I mean, let's be fair. Let's be transparent.
Yes, but the bigger message is that in very recent years, when there's been a request to increase that equity ratio, to thicken that equity component in the capital structure, the commission has said no.
Exactly,
because there is a balance that needs to be struck, and at the end of the day, we're talking about dollars that need to be paid for by customers.
Exactly. I mean, this money doesn't come from anybody. It doesn't just come out of thin air. It comes from customers paying their bills.
Oh, Other things.
Other things.
Other big, again, we're kind of just looking for like the big top, maybe 3-4
I
big
mean,
drivers.
Right now there's been some press about news articles about the coal plant in Oak Creek, which actually the first half of it has shut down as of June 1, is my understanding, and that is an issue in the case because if nothing changes from what the utilities proposed, about $300 million of profit, more than $300 million of profit, would continue to be earned on that investment, on that plant that is no longer, once it's no longer running, when the full thing is no longer running, which means that's a lot of profit for something that wouldn't be needed to keep the lights on. So this is the whole issue of stranded costs, which we've talked about on past episodes, but it's front and center in this case, both for We Energies and it's actually in the WPS case as well, because WPS owns a share of the Columbia Power Plant in Portage, which is also going to shut down, at least start its shutdown, if not completed in 2026. So if it's within the 2 years of this case, and so finding savings there is going to be critical.
Yeah. We've talked quite a bit about the stranded cost issue, the sort of dead power plants issue,
Exactly.
right? And I think that $300 million you'd mentioned for Oak Creek, that's over the remaining period that the company wants to stretch it out.
Not during the 2 years, but during over a decade or more, well over a decade that they want to keep earning a return on that plant.
Yeah, and really, I'm just conceptually, right? Like the idea that customers should continue to allow, or the commission should allow investors to earn a profit on something that is no longer used to serve customers and will, in fact, once these facilities are shut down, just basically be gone. It's
correct.
We often talk about the Pleasant Prairie Power Plant. At this point, it's basically a gravel lot. There's nothing there.
It's being redeveloped into something else, and which is fine, good for economic development, but they're still earning a profit on gravel.
Yeah. So
at this point,
and but for the securitization that we were able to negotiate with the utility, all of that would still be providing a profit stream for investors. At least we were able to at least get the utility to refinance about $100 million of that. So that's ratepayer savings. But this is a big issue that's going to be coming at us from different directions. You had mentioned Columbia, which is not only a Wisconsin Public Service Corporation issue, but it's a Madison Gas and Electric issue. It's an Alliant issue. And there's a lot of plants out there. There's questions even in the press. Alliant Energy announced that they changed their plans for the Edgewater facility.
That's right.
And they're not going to be retiring it like they had initially planned starting next year, but they're going to repower it. But that means still taking stuff out of service, ripping stuff out that's not going to be useful anymore, and essentially retiring that equipment. And once that's out, it's certainly not all paid for. It's still, a lot of it's still on the books.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's the thing, especially when it comes to the pollution controls, because a lot of these pollution controls were put on these plants just in the last 15 or so years, because of the consent decrees with EPA, the consent decrees with Sierra Club, or whomever. These coal plants finally got the pollution controls that make the air less toxic for lungs and hearts to breathe, and blood and the hearts to work correctly. But all that did nothing about the carbon emissions. Leaving the carbon emissions aside, but billions were invested in these pollution controls across Wisconsin power plants, and now all of those plants are going away in some form or another over the next number of years, as utilities rethink coal in a big way and shift to natural gas and other fuels.
Yeah, and those investments were made based off of an expectation, or at least a reasonable guess at the time, that those plants were going to continue to operate for a long time.
Exactly.
But things change, economics change, and as with any investment, sometimes something that looks like a winner right up front can flip on you at some point. And that's sort of our thinking, our look at this is like, look, it's fine that you were allowed to earn a return as regulated by the commission while that stuff is used to serve customers. Once it's no longer used to serve customers, once it's now a loser insofar as an investment is concerned, you should bear the cost of that as a shareholder in order to strike that balance. Because if it's heads I win, tails you lose, then there is no balance there.
Yeah, and when you think about all the new generation that's coming, like the We Energies has over $2 billion of projected expenditures for new natural gas infrastructure, power generation, and related infrastructure in Oak Creek, which is all separate from the rate case that we're talking about. But when you look at all the things that they will be earning their return on, it's almost like having your cake and eating it too, to try to keep earning that profit over something that's has nothing to do with keeping the lights on.
Yeah, I mean, they're replacing the old stuff that they're having to retire early, more than 1 for 1. I mean, to a certain extent, probably more than 2 for 1. And then the thing I want to just highlight about what you just talked about is we were just talking about these huge increases over the next 2 years, right? And huge increases over the last 4 years. All of that new investment you just mentioned is stuff that would, if approved, would be coming down the road and would increase rates even more.
Right, beyond those years. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, beyond what we're looking at just for 2025 and 2026.
That's right.
So, I mean, that's the affordability issue and whatnot is a challenge. All right, we're going to hit pause right here for a second.
New office rule: no Crocs on the couch.
I did not. This wasn't planned to be a bring your kid to work today, but I have things changed and I had to mind the chaos goblin and bring him back into work.
Whatever.
Anyway,
works.
So yeah, I'm trying to regain my brain. Anyway, so these are all really important issues insofar as affordability. Now, there is an affordability adjacent or related driver in the rate case, which you do have to acknowledge. Back during the pandemic and then in the years subsequent to sort of 2020, we worked with We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service to sort of refine and expand the low-income forgiveness tool. It's a arrearage management tool to help folks that have fallen behind on their bills.
Yep.
Actually, by quite a bit. You have
provide some forgiveness
to provide a pathway to getting their accounts back in good standing, to reestablish good payment habits, and to kind of clear the deck so that there's not constantly this threat of disconnection and back bills looming over you. And so it's a forgiveness program, and if you pay your bill on time for 12 months, then your back bills are slowly, progressively forgiven, so that by the time you get to the end, then it's all gone. You got a clean slate. But there's no such thing as a free lunch, so someone's got to pay for that, and that does represent a little bit of a cost shift from those customers to other customers. And the utility has been keeping track of that. And then now is when they're in and asking for, more of that to be recovered through rates over the next couple of years. And it is a driver, particularly in the second year when that comes in. And this is a real thing that we, as folks in this regulatory space, as utility customers, as Wisconsinites, need to really grapple with, is that utility service is essential service. It's not optional. It's not a venti latte from Starbucks that you can do without if things are tight, right? And so what do we do with, like we're talking about tipping points?
Right.
What do we do as these rates get higher and higher? Like We Energies put in their filing that by 2026 the average residential bill is going to be over $150 a month.
Right, for the typical customer.
For the typical residential customer, at least according to some of the numbers that they put in to their rate application, that it would be over $150 per month. And so, yes, there's these cost shifts for things like the low-income forgiveness tool, but how much, should customers really bear all of that, or should maybe shareholders start kicking in for some of that?
Well, you start to wonder, because the affordability challenge is so real, and it's striking that there's just so much coming at customers with the double digit increase on top of double digit increase that I think there's got to be we got to look at options here that can save people money. It's not the easiest answer to just say, make everybody pay more. It's not an easy answer to say the shareholders have to shoulder everything either. But I think there's got to be some way to mitigate this.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is that, part of me on certain days thinks like, well, if the way the utility has managed the business means that they're pushing a segment of their customer base into a position where the bills are unaffordable no matter what they do, right? That maybe there should be some consequences. And there are other days when it's more, when I'm thinking about this, it's more about that balance.
Yeah.
The one thing I think as we're talking here, and as people may have seen stuff in the press that just for me, it was a little galling when the utility originally filed their rate application, is they put a huge spotlight on the impact of the low income forgiveness tool within the rate case. As like, oh, this is a huge driver, and then there's kind of like, oh, don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Don't look at all of the capex, the new plant that's coming into service. That was kind of frustrating for me in terms of the messaging the company stepped out with.
Well, and that's the messaging challenge is always one that I'm always dealing with as kind of CUB's communicator in chief. But I think there's just. To say that it's a driver is true. To say that it's like the only driver is not the case, and to say it's just one of those things. And frankly, one of the reasons it is the amount of money it is it's several years worth of startup of this forgiveness tool. So apparently, it's been a popular program, this forgiveness program, and going back over time, customers have been paying. All customers have been paying for those bill balances that struggling customers can't meet. They can't afford. That's that bad debt expense. Mm-hmm. And we're certainly hoping that we'd see savings there that would help offset some of these increases, but. I think we have to dive into the details in the case.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking with a colleague who actually works for a different utility, and really, I think the appropriate way to think of this is you're right. Like, other customers are going to pay for this one way or another. They're going to pay for the fact that the utility has has rates that are unaffordable to a large number of people, one way or another. Whether it's when it turns into bad debt because customers are unable to pay their bills and it goes into a bad debt category.
Exactly.
Or through something like a low-income forgiveness tool or an arrears management program or an affordability rate program. All that does is it just shifts the timing. You're just essentially front-loading that, and you're moving that up front, and you're taking, I feel like, right, the view of, well, like, if customers are going to have to pay for it, right, one way or another, let's at least take the path that is perhaps the more productive and compassionate path that makes proactive and makes it so that, okay, well, if there's a cost, at least let's have one of the benefits of the cost is that people can kind of claw their way out of this sort of arreared situation. They're not constantly facing maybe the threat of disconnection if we can provide like affordability programs and that type of thing. And so, anyone who's out there being like, oh, well, this is something new, or they're thinking about like, somehow that if recovery of this program, or if we got rid of the LIFT program for WEC, that somehow these costs in the utility system would go away. That's simply not true. Like they would pop up someplace else. They would show up
somewhere else, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that was just me. I like the way that they kind of stepped it out. It felt like they were trying to, I don't know. One, whether it's distract or they were trying to lean into certain messaging to get certain people really angry about stuff.
They wanted to say that this is something that's definitely in the spotlight, and yes, it's one thing that's in the spotlight, but it's a bit overstated.
Yeah,
to single it out.
And just affordability as a general is something that we're going to be looking at. For folks who live in the Milwaukee area, the Walnut Way Conservation Corp, who works with the Lindsay Heights neighborhood. They will be participating in the We Energies rate case again. And so we look forward to seeing what they bring to the table in the discussion, because that perspective from kind of not even so much the boots on the ground, but the lived experience for folks who do face affordability challenges in the neighborhoods in Milwaukee and around Wisconsin, even in rural communities where, making ends meet is a day-to-day struggle. I think is going to be a really big contribution again to the rate case. It was in 2022, and I anticipated being that same way this year.
And the city of Milwaukee is going to be involved again. They've intervened in the case, as has the MMSD, the sewerage district. So a lot of Milwaukee entities and players getting involved.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's the high level. Anything else at sort of the 30,000-foot view level that you think folks should be able to take away from this new rate filing as we go through the summer, as probably new stories trickle out or they get little things in their bill, in their bill inserts from the utility? Anything else you think people should be aware of or think about?
Well, far be it from me to talk about your area of expertise, but here I go. No, and just that one of the areas that we have to dive into is how the costs are divvied up among the different customer groups, whether that's residential, commercial, industrial. This, as we mentioned on the last episode, the state has kicked off, the PSC has kicked off an investigation into kind of the best way, the most thoughtful way to divvy up that pie, but it's not that case hasn't really gotten rolling, so that won't have a bearing on this year's case. But the other kind of elephant in the room, if there is one, is Microsoft, and so the Microsoft data center is expected to be part of this case. Microsoft has intervened in this case. The energy demand for that project is still TBD, I think. But I think in talking at our NASUCA conference, at the state regulators conference in D.C. in February, there's conversation all across the industry this year about data centers and the impact, and how to protect residential customers from unnecessary costs linked to these things. Some states are talking about divvying things up so that it's, instead of 3 customer classes, residential, commercial, and industrial, it's 4, where data centers get their own class. Kind of as another way to shield residential. There, how'd I do? Talking about your areas of expertise.
You did great. I'm going to let you testify on cost allocation from now on.
Oh no!
But you bring up a fair point, right? Because if I look at We Energies, for example, in 2025, the overall increase to the size of the pie is about 7%, but the utility has proposed that residentials get about 9.25%. Right, so 7 versus over 9 in terms of rate adjustment. Pub service for 2025 is an even bigger gap. It's about 8.5 overall. That's about how much rates overall are going to go up, but they want residential rates to go up by over 14%. Right, in the first year. Same kind of picture in the second year. How bad it is kind of flip flops between the utilities. But this cost allocation issue is not only just an evergreen issue we're always dealing with to make certain that all customer groups are paying their fair share, but the data center issue is huge, because in terms of maybe like new costs on the system over the 2025 and 2026 period for We Energies, it's unclear that there's going to be a lot that well, actually, the big question is any costs that are being driven by Microsoft's investment in Southeast Wisconsin, how are they being treated, and is Microsoft fairly picking up most, if not all, of those costs, or how is that going to be treated?
Right.
So that's a big one. So it's not to say necessarily that Microsoft is driving the overall increase, but how the money sloshes around between the different customer groups is tied to Microsoft, not only and as well as the usual issue of how you allocate those costs.
Yeah, and to be sure, Microsoft has been saying the right things in the press. They've been saying they're committed to pay their fair share. They've even filed a letter with the commission saying that Microsoft is committed to paying its own way for the assets needed to serve it. So, but obviously the devil's always in the details, and protecting residential customers and small business customers is paramount when the word data, the two phrase data centers is pretty much all the industry's talking about in 2024.
Cool. Well, we'll probably dig into some of these in a little more detail as we go through. Some of them we might have to wait until after we file our testimony, just, litigation strategy and that type of thing.
Sure.
But, we'll be getting into this stuff a little bit. I have a 5-year-old that's staring at this back of my head, wanting me to jump off. So I think we'll leave it there.
So we'll call it.
We'll call it.
Please like and subscribe.
Yes. Thanks for following along. Like and subscribe. Make certain to share. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Hilarious.
You little goblin.
Am I on camera?